The text message arrived while I was standing behind the polished glass counter of my boutique smoothing out a wrinkle in a silk scarf. I am leaving you and moving to Cabo with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I have already emptied our joint checking account. Haha. My hands did not shake as I read the words glowing on the screen. My voice did not crack or falter as I turned back to Mrs. Margaret Collins, helping her decide between the azure blue and the charcoal gray. The only sign that my husband of 12 years had just detonated our marriage via a text message was a slight tightening at the corners of my eyes, a microscopic tension that nobody but me would ever notice. I waited patiently until Margaret Collins had made her purchase wrapped in our signature silver tissue paper and walked out the door with a chime of the overhead bell before I finally allowed myself to type a reply. Good luck. My name is Eleanor Green, and at 38 years old I had just received the most callous goodbye in the history of romance. But while Jackson was likely high-fiving himself over his grand exit, imagining me collapsing in a puddle of tears over his betrayal, I simply walked to the front door and flipped the sign to closed. The signs had been there for months, like neon billboards flashing in the dark. The late nights at the office that never seemed to reflect in his commission checks, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he started going to the gym religiously, buying fitted clothing that was far too young for him, trying desperately to claw back his 20s. 3 months ago I had found a receipt for a romantic dinner for 2 at the Onyx Room, a steakhouse that costs more than our monthly car payment, on a night he claimed he was working late filing reports. That very same evening I had opened a separate high-yield savings account at a completely different bank across town. A week later, when Jackson suggested we merge all our accounts to simplify things for our future, I agreed with a bright smile while secretly transferring 90% of my personal savings into my new private vault. The joint account he had just bragged about emptying contained exactly enough to keep him from getting suspicious, roughly 2 months of regular deposits. The rest was safely tucked away, along with a digital folder containing detailed records of every suspicious transaction he had made over the last year. My phone buzzed again on the glass counter. Do not waste your time begging me to stay. Jennifer and I fly out tomorrow. I will send someone to collect my things later. Jennifer Mitchell, the new receptionist at his firm. I had met her at the company Christmas party and watched her laugh a little too loudly at my husband's dad jokes, noticing the way her hand lingered on his bicep when she thought the room was too crowded for anyone to see. She was young enough to be his daughter and naive enough to believe she was the exception to the rule. I did not dignify his text with a response. Instead, I dialed the number for Catherine Stewart, the shark of a divorce attorney I had consulted 2 months ago when I first found the hotel charges on our credit card statement. It is happening, I said, simply leaning against the counter. He just made his move. The papers are ready, Catherine replied, her voice calm and professional. I will file them first thing in the morning. Do you want him served in Cabo? No rush, I said, staring at my reflection in the shop window. Let him think he has won for a little while. Another text came through from Jackson. I know this must be hard for you, Eleanor. You are not getting any younger after all. But at least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop. The successful high-end boutique I had built from the ground up, which now generated more annual net income than his mid-level management salary ever could. The business whose profits I had meticulously kept separate from our joint finances thanks to an ironclad operating agreement. I smiled a cold, hard smile, thinking about the certified letters that would be waiting for him. He should enjoy his moment of triumph because it was going to be short. I spent the evening at our house, my house actually, since I had inherited it from my grandmother and kept it solely in my name despite Jackson's repeated nagging to add him to the deed. That was another gut instinct that had paid off. As I sorted through the financial documents Catherine would need, I stumbled across our wedding album tucked away on a dusty shelf. Jackson looked so different back then, before his midlife crisis had turned him into a caricature of his former self. These days he wore shirts that were too tight for his softening midsection and tried too hard to relate to the 20-somethings in his office, using slang that sounded ridiculous coming from the mouth of a 45-year-old man. My phone kept vibrating on the coffee table, buzzing with a stream of consciousness from him, each message more condescending than the last. I had been planning this for months. Jennifer understands me in a way you never could. You will be fine eventually. Maybe you can find someone in your age bracket. I have already told my family. They agree that we just grew apart. Really, it is nobody's fault. I took a screenshot of every single message and uploaded them to my evidence folder. Let him dig his grave a few feet deeper. Catherine would absolutely love his casual confession of premeditation and his gleeful announcement that he had drained our account. The final text of the night caught my attention and made me sit up straight. By the way, I booked our first-class flights and the resort suite with the joint credit card. Consider it my parting gift to you since you will be keeping the miles. LOL. Perfect. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the back of my credit card. Eleanor Green speaking, I said when the automated system finally connected me. I need to report immediate fraudulent charges and have a card reported stolen. Of course, Mrs. Green, said the representative whose name was Cynthia Adams. Can you identify the unauthorized charges? 2 first-class tickets to Cabo San Lucas booked today along with resort fees at the Royal Palm, and I need to have my husband removed as an authorized user immediately. Do you have documentation of the fraud? I have text messages from my husband admitting he used our joint card to book a vacation with his mistress after emptying our bank account, I said, keeping my voice steady. I would be happy to forward them to your fraud department. The professional tone of Cynthia Adams could barely hide her satisfaction as she began hitting keys on her keyboard. I am canceling those charges right now, Mrs. Green. Jackson and Jennifer were going to arrive at the airport tomorrow only to find their tickets invalid and their luxury suite cancelled. My phone buzzed again. Do not worry about the house. I will let you live there until you find something smaller. I actually laughed out loud at that one, the sound echoing in the empty living room. Did he really think he had a claim to my grandmother's house? Was his ego so inflated that he had forgotten whose name was on the deed? Another buzz. And I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment plan for my share of the business equity. My share. He wanted a share of the business I had self-funded, self-operated, and poured my soul into while he complained about my long hours and called it my little hobby. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive Cabernet I had been saving for a special occasion. This certainly qualified. Tomorrow Jackson Green was going to learn some very hard truths about real estate law and separate assets. But tonight I would enjoy the silence and plan my next chapter. The morning brought a flood of increasingly angry texts from Jackson. What the hell did you do to the credit card, Eleanor? The airline will not print our boarding passes. The hotel says the reservation is void. Answer me right now. I put my phone on silent and drove to the boutique. Friday was always our busiest day, and I had a new shipment of Italian leather handbags to inventory. Life goes on even when your husband is trying to run away with a receptionist who is young enough to still be on her parents' health insurance. Around noon his mother Dorothy Green called me. Eleanor, honey, Michael called us in a panic. He told us everything about how controlling you have been and how you drove him away. He says you are being vindictive now and messing with his travel plans. I put her on speakerphone while I arranged a window display of silk scarves. Did he also mention that he emptied our joint bank account and tried to book tickets for himself and his girlfriend on my credit card, Dorothy? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Well, she stammered. He said you left him no choice, that you were cold and distant. Dorothy, I have his text messages on my phone right now. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money, or perhaps the one where he made fun of my age while running off with a girl who cannot legally rent a car yet? Another pause, heavily weighted with realization. He did seem a bit cruel on the phone, Dorothy finally admitted quietly. I told him that sending a text message was inappropriate. I appreciate the call, Dorothy. I have always liked you, but I think it is best if we end this conversation now. My lawyer has advised me to have minimal contact with Jackson's family during the proceedings. Proceedings? She asked, her voice rising. Goodbye, Dorothy. By late afternoon, Jackson's sister Caroline was spreading family gossip through our mutual friends. Apparently Jackson and Jennifer were currently stuck in a cheap motel near the airport, their Cabo trip permanently on hold. He had tried to use his personal credit cards to salvage the trip, but they had been maxed out for months, another red flag I had noticed but kept to myself. Catherine called with an update. The emergency hearing is set for Monday morning. Given his written confession about emptying the joint account and the documented credit card fraud, we are in a very strong position to freeze all remaining assets. Has he been served yet? Not yet, but the process server is heading to the motel address now. Speaking of which, his girlfriend's social media is providing excellent evidence. She has been posting about their adventure all day, including some very nasty comments about you. I smiled, thinking of my own documentation. A year of suspicious withdrawals, hotel receipts, and text messages proving his premeditation. Jackson had been so fixated on his grand escape that he never considered I might be watching, waiting, and preparing. My phone buzzed with another text. You think you are so smart, Eleanor, but I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half of that business is mine. I forwarded the text to Catherine, adding it to the growing file of Jackson's mistakes. Let him learn the hard way what separate property and business ownership actually mean. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being better prepared. The emergency hearing on Monday was everything I had hoped it would be. Jackson showed up wearing his new youthful wardrobe, designer jeans that were far too tight and a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Jennifer was waiting out in the hallway, her youth painfully obvious under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courthouse. Catherine presented our evidence methodically. Jackson's gloating texts about emptying the account, his attempted credit card fraud, his documented history of hidden spending, every piece collected over months of silent observation. Jackson's hastily hired lawyer Mason Carter tried to spin a narrative. Your Honor, my client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Green's actions were vindictive and calculating. Calculating, Catherine countered immediately. You mean prudent? My client was protecting her separate assets and keeping detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That is not vindictive, that is sound business practice. Judge Harrison Turner reviewed my documentation, scrutinizing the property deed for the house and the LLC formation documents for the boutique, which were solely in my name. He looked at the clear separation of business and personal finances that Jackson had always complained about. Mr. Green, the judge said, turning to face my husband. You have admitted via text message to willfully draining a joint account and attempting to use joint credit to fund a trip with your mistress. Do you deny this? Jackson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I just wanted a clean break. By committing financial fraud? Judge Turner raised an eyebrow. And now you are claiming rights to property that is clearly documented as separate from marital assets. The business grew during the marriage, Mason Carter tried again. My client is entitled to the appreciation. The business was founded prior to the marriage, Catherine interrupted, and Mrs. Green has maintained strict separation of business and personal funds the entire time. We have ledgers for every penny invested and earned. I watched Jackson's face as reality began to crash down on him. He thought this would be easy. Drain our accounts, run off with his girlfriend, maybe claim half my business in the divorce settlement. He had never bothered to understand my insistence on keeping things separate. He had mocked my careful bookkeeping as obsessive. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct, Judge Turner announced, slamming his gavel. All joint assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Green is ordered to return all funds removed from the joint accounts within 24 hours. But the money is gone, Jackson protested, standing up. We spent it on deposits and... Then I suggest you find a way to replace it, Judge Turner cut him off. And Mr. Green, the court takes a very dim view of using joint credit cards to fund affairs. Outside the courtroom I heard Jennifer asking Jackson about their plans for Cabo. His answer was drowned out by the sound of my heels clicking confidently against the marble floor as I walked back toward the business he had never respected. The next few weeks brought a series of increasingly desperate moves from Jackson. He tried to claim the boutique was his idea initially. He suddenly remembered investing cash in the early days, a claim quickly debunked by my meticulous ledgers. He even suggested he had been a silent partner all along. "He's getting desperate," Catherine observed during our weekly call. His girlfriend's social media shows they are now living in her studio apartment. Apparently living on a receptionist's salary is not quite as glamorous as he imagined. Jackson's family began to reach out again, their tone markedly different from their initial accusations. "We had no idea," Caroline admitted during an unexpected visit. "Oh, the boutique. He told us you were cold and controlling, that he had to escape to find himself, but then we saw the screenshots of his texts, the way he bragged about taking your money." "That is not the son I thought I raised," Dorothy Green sobbed into the phone, her voice cracking with a mixture of shame and disbelief. She told me about the things Jackson had said to her in private, the cruel remarks about my age and his arrogant boasting about replacing me with someone younger and fresher. I listened to the voicemail later that evening, sitting in my living room with a glass of Pinot Noir, and I simply pressed delete. I didn't call her back. Her support might have meant the world to me a few weeks ago when the wound was fresh, but now it just felt like rats scurrying off a sinking ship. They weren't rallying around me because they loved me, they were reaching out because they realized Jackson had destroyed his own life, and they didn't want to go down with him. Ironically, while Jackson's life was imploding, my boutique was thriving more than ever before. The local rumor mill in our tight-knit suburb had gone into overdrive, but instead of scandalizing my business, it seemed to galvanize the women in the community. New customers walked through the glass doors every day, not just to browse, but to silently offer their allegiance. They would linger by the silk scarves or the cashmere sweaters, making eye contact that said, "I know, and I am with you." One afternoon, Diana Morris, a regular customer who usually only stopped in during the holidays, dropped a $3,000 designer handbag onto the counter. As I wrapped it in tissue paper, she leaned in and lowered her voice. "My ex-husband tried something similar 10 years ago," she confided, her eyes steel-hard. "He thought he could hide the assets in offshore accounts and leave me with nothing but the debt. Men like him never expect us to be smarter than they are." She squeezed my hand across the counter before leaving. It was moments like that which kept me going. My phone still buzzed occasionally with texts from Jackson. His tone was manic, swinging wildly between explosive rage and pathetic manipulation. One minute it was, "You ruined everything, you vindictive witch," and the next it was, "I never wanted to hurt you, Eleanor. Can't we settle this outside of court? You know this business would be nothing without my support." I didn't reply to a single one. Instead, I took screenshots and forwarded every message directly to my lawyer, Catherine Stewart. My silence was the loudest response I could give. Let him dig his grave a few feet deeper, I thought. Through the grapevine, and specifically through some of the younger women who frequented the boutique, I heard that Jennifer Mitchell was having second thoughts about her grand romance. Apparently, sharing a cramped studio apartment with a middle-aged man who had no access to his bank accounts was not the adventurous lifestyle she had signed up for. The thrill of sneaking around luxury hotels lost its luster when replaced by the harsh fluorescent lights of a cheap rental and the reality of Jackson's snoring. Catherine told me during a status update that Jennifer had started posting vague, inspirational quotes about toxic relationships on her social media, and by that morning, she had removed her relationship status entirely. For a fleeting second, I almost felt pity for Jackson. Almost. But then the memory of that text message would flash in my mind, the one where he laughed about emptying our account, the casual cruelty of his comments about my fading looks, and how he assumed I would be a helpless, broken woman without him. That pity evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, burning pride. I was proud of my foresight. I was proud of my quiet strength. I was proud that while he was underestimating me, I was outmaneuvering him. The final divorce hearing was the closing act of a play Jackson had written but failed to direct. The courtroom was sterile and cold, but to me, it felt like a sanctuary. When Jackson walked in, the swagger was gone. He looked deflated, wearing a suit that was clearly a few years old and fit him poorly, likely because he had been forced to return his new designer wardrobe to pay back the funds he had stolen from the joint account. Jennifer was noticeably absent. According to the office gossip, she had already moved on to a colleague her own age. Jackson's lawyer, Mason Carter, looked exhausted before the proceedings even began. He had the weary expression of a man who knew he was fighting a losing battle but had to go through the motions anyway. He tried to find loopholes in my documentation, grasping at straws. "Your Honor," Mason said, adjusting his tie nervously, "despite the documents regarding separate property, my client contributed significantly to the growth of the business through moral support and strategic advice." Catherine didn't even look up from her notes as she interrupted. "And by moral support," she said, her voice dripping with professional disdain, "does counsel refer to these text messages where Mr. Green refers to Eleanor's business as a cute little hobby shop? Or perhaps these social media posts where he mocks her entrepreneurial efforts to his friends?" Judge Harrison Turner had seen enough. He peered over his glasses, his face impassive, and delivered the ruling that solidified my freedom. The settlement mirrored my meticulous planning perfectly. I retained sole ownership of my home, my boutique, and all my premarital assets. Jackson was awarded his personal belongings and his luxury sedan, which, as the judge pointed out, was currently worth less than the loan balance Jackson still owed on it. As we walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, Jackson lunged toward me, his face twisted in bitterness. "You ruined me," he hissed, ignoring his lawyer's hand on his arm. "I have to move back in with my parents, Eleanor. I am 45 years old." "No, Jackson," I said, stopping to look him dead in the eye. "You ruined yourself. I just made sure you didn't take me down with you." Dorothy Green was waiting at the curb in her sedan, the engine idling. She looked older, tired. She was there to drive her middle-aged son back to his childhood bedroom. The irony was suffocating. The man who had mocked my age and called me old news was now retreating to the womb, while I was walking toward a future I had built with my own two hands. "You planned this whole thing," Jackson accused, his voice rising as people turned to look. "You knew this would happen." "No," I said softly. "I just paid attention. And unlike you, I understood the value of good bookkeeping." Dorothy stepped out of the car then, moving between us. "That is enough, Jackson," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, a tone I hadn't heard her use since Jackson was a teenager. "You have embarrassed yourself enough for one lifetime. Get in the car." As they walked away, I heard her start in on him, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "Honestly, what were you thinking? Emptying a bank account? Sending those horrible texts? Did you think there would be no consequences?" I watched their car disappear into traffic and felt a profound sense of lightness. Jackson had thought he was writing the end of our story with that cruel text message about Cabo. Instead, he had merely written the prologue to my greatest success. My phone buzzed in my purse. It wasn't Jackson. It was a notification from my boutique's online store. Another order had just come in. Life moved on, just not in the direction he had imagined. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I cut the ribbon on my second boutique location in the neighboring city. The irony was delicious. While Jackson struggled to rebuild the rubble of his life, the little shop he had dismissed as a hobby was expanding into a franchise. I had hired 3 new staff members and launched an e-commerce platform that was shipping nationwide. News of Jackson's downfall trickled back to me through mutual acquaintances, though I never asked for it. He had tried to get back into the dating scene, only to find that women his age weren't interested in a man living in his mother's guest room with significant debt. The younger women, the demographic he had so desperately chased, avoided him like the plague. It turned out Jennifer Mitchell had warned her circle of friends about him, even sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to win her back. He had become a pariah in the very social circles he used to idolize. His career took a hit as well. The HR department at his firm had launched an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, spurred by the chaos of our public split. It resulted in a formal reprimand. The promotion to vice president he had been banking on went to a colleague with less experience but a spotless record. Jackson had tried to claim age discrimination, according to his sister, Caroline Green, who visited my store unexpectedly one rainy Tuesday. He told us they were punishing him for dating someone younger, Caroline said, running her fingers over a rack of silk blouses. She looked sheepish, avoiding my gaze. But HR just added his complaint to his file and moved on. I was surprised to see Caroline, but her presence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Jackson had alienated his own family. "I know we didn't support you at the beginning, Eleanor," she admitted, finally looking at me. "He played the victim so well. But watching how he handled everything, how he treated you, and how he's acting now. I am ashamed we ever believed him." My lawyer, Catherine, kept me updated on Jackson's continued legal flailing. He filed petition after petition, trying to challenge the divorce settlement. Every single one was dismissed. He actually tried to argue that his text about emptying the account was just a joke between spouses, Catherine told me over lunch one day, laughing as she sipped her iced tea. The judge asked him if bank robbery is considered legal if the robber claims he was just being funny. The success of the boutique brought a different kind of validation. Local business magazines wanted to feature me, not as the scorned wife, but as the savvy entrepreneur who had bulletproofed her assets. I started getting emails from young women, aspiring business owners like Alice Reed, asking for advice on how to protect their own ventures. "The best protection is preparation," I told Alice, who reminded me a little of a younger, smarter version of Jennifer. "And always trust your instincts. If something feels off, it usually is." Dorothy called occasionally, usually after Jackson had done something particularly self-destructive. He had turned to online gambling, hoping for a quick windfall to solve his financial mess, and then got entangled in a pyramid scheme that promised fast returns on cryptocurrency. Every attempt he made to shortcut his way back to the top only dug him deeper into the hole. "I don't know where we went wrong with him," Dorothy sighed during one call. "His father and I offered to help him get an apartment if he would just take responsibility for his actions. But he still blames everyone else. He blames you, he blames Jennifer, the company, the judge. He takes no ownership." I listened politely, but I kept my emotional distance. Their family drama was no longer my burden to carry. My life was filled with architectural plans for a third location and meetings about expanding into luxury accessories. The only remnant of Jackson's influence on my life was a small, framed screenshot I kept on a shelf in my private office. It was his final text before I blocked his number: "Have fun with your little shop. At least it will keep you busy while you get old." Right below it sat my latest award from the Chamber of Commerce. It was proof that sometimes, the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted the grand opening of the third boutique. The event drew local media, and the narrative was entirely about female empowerment and business growth. Jackson's betrayal had been reduced to a mere footnote in my biography. Toward the end of the evening, Jennifer Mitchell walked in. I stiffened slightly, but she didn't look like the arrogant girl who had flaunted her affair. She looked older, humbled. She shifted her handbag nervously, holding it like a shield. "I owe you an apology, Eleanor," she said quietly. "I believed everything he told me. He said you were cold, controlling, that you didn't support his dreams." I continued arranging a display of designer sunglasses, keeping my hands busy. "Those weren't dreams, Jennifer. They were escapes. There is a big difference." "I know that now," she said. She paused, looking around the elegant store. "He tried to move in with me when you froze the accounts. He thought my studio apartment was just a temporary stopgap. But after 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a personal loan to get us a bigger place, I understood what you meant about the difference between a partner and a parasite." I actually laughed. It was a genuine, unforced laugh. I assume he had big plans but no way to fund them? Exactly, Jennifer nodded. He said everything would be fine once his investments paid off, once he got the promotion. She shook her head. I am seeing someone my own age now. We have student loans and a small rental, but at least we are building something real. After she left, Adeline Roberts, my deputy manager, leaned over and whispered, "Was that the mistress?" "No," I replied, turning back to the display. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did." Speaking of lessons, I pointed to a young couple browsing the leather goods. "Let's talk about your idea for the new accessory line." The boutique had become more than a business, it was a symbol of resilience. I found myself mentoring more young women, emphasizing financial independence. Dorothy called one last time, not to complain about Jackson, but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson," she said, her voice steady. "We learned the hard way about the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Jackson is still living at home, and he still blames the world, but we stopped defending him. We stopped giving him money. That is your legacy to this family, Eleanor. You showed us what strength actually looks like." I thought about that legacy as I reviewed the revenue projections for the fourth quarter. Jackson had intended to discard me, to trade me in for a newer model and take half of what I had built. Instead, he had inadvertently pushed me to become untouchable. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Michael filed another petition to renegotiate the alimony. The judge dismissed it with prejudice and ordered him to pay your legal fees for the harassment. Thought you'd like to know. I smiled, picturing him sitting in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by high school trophies, still trying to rewrite an ending that had been set in stone the moment he underestimated me. 2 years after that hateful text message, I received an invitation to speak at a major women in business conference in Chicago. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal, it was about building and protecting a brand. During the Q&A session, a woman in the back raised her hand and asked how to handle the awkwardness of keeping finances separate in a marriage. "My husband says I'm being paranoid," she said. "He says marriage means sharing everything." "My ex-husband said the same thing," I answered into the microphone, my voice clear and steady. "Right up until the moment he tried to claim half of my business to fund a vacation with his mistress." Trust your instincts. Protection is not paranoia, it is self-respect. By then, my chain of boutiques had grown to 5 locations. The little shop Jackson had mocked now employed 30 people and had been featured in national publications. Through the grapevine, I heard Jackson had finally moved out of his parents' house and into a garage apartment he rented from a friend. He had been forced to take a lower-paying job after his company eliminated his position during a restructure. His dating profile, which a friend showed me, still claimed he was young at heart, though the photo was clearly 5 years out of date. Jennifer Mitchell, in a twist of fate, had become a regular customer at my flagship store. She had gone back to school, got her degree in business, and started her own social media consultancy. "You inspired me," she told me once while buying a blazer for a client meeting. "You showed me that a woman can build something that lasts, rather than waiting for a man to promise her the world." I never took down the framed screenshot in my office. It wasn't there to make me angry anymore. It was there to remind me of where I started, and just how far I had come. I did not keep that old, crumpled printout in my private office as a reminder of the pain. I kept it as undeniable proof of just how far I had traveled from the lowest valley of my life. Right below that hidden memento hung a small, elegant brass plaque on the wall that simply read, "Success is the best revenge." It was the truth that had fueled me through sleepless nights and endless strategy meetings. Tonight was the 5th anniversary celebration of my original boutique, the place where it all began. I stood on the mezzanine, looking down at my dedicated staff and the sea of loyal customers who had supported me from day one. The room was electric, filled with laughter, clinking champagne flutes, and the soft hum of jazz. What had started as a single, struggling storefront had transformed into the flagship location of a flourishing fashion empire with locations across the state. To my surprise, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Dorothy Green, Jackson's mother. I had not sent her an invitation, yet there she was, holding a glass of sparkling cider and looking somewhat humbled. She waited patiently until the crowd around me thinned out before she approached. I noticed immediately that she was smoothing down the front of her dress, a silk designer piece she had purchased from my latest collection. The irony was delicious. "I saw Jackson yesterday," Dorothy said softly, her eyes avoiding mine for a moment before meeting my gaze. "He spent the whole afternoon talking about his glory days, rambling on about the life he could have had. He still does not understand, Eleanor. He thinks he lost everything because of the divorce decree. He refuses to see that he did not lose it. He threw it away." I nodded slowly, my mind flashing back to that hateful text message he had sent me years ago. I remembered his casual cruelty, the arrogance in his words. He had assumed I would shatter without him. He expected me to beg, to plead, to collapse just to feed his ego and validate his own desperation. But he had miscalculated. Instead of breaking down, I had built something stronger than he could have ever imagined. Every new boutique opening, every ribbon cutting, and every positive review was a testament to what a woman can achieve when she finally stops dimming her light to accommodate an insecure man. "Excuse me, Mrs. Green," a soft voice interrupted us. It was one of my newest sales associates, a bright young woman I had hired just last month. By a twist of fate, her name was Jennifer, the same name as the woman Jackson had left me for. But hearing it now did not sting. Instead, it felt like I was reclaiming the name, stripping it of its power to hurt me. She had a question about the new inventory management system I had implemented, and as I guided her through the process, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling shop window. I paused, really looking at the woman staring back at me. I saw what Jackson had failed to see 5 years ago. I did not see a woman who was just getting older. I saw a woman who had become wiser, sharper, and infinitely more successful. His cruel text message was meant to be the period at the end of my sentence. Instead, it had been the capital letter of a brand new paragraph. It was not just a victory for me, but for every woman who hears my story and realizes she deserves so much better than being the collateral damage of someone else's midlife crisis. Standing there, surrounded by the empire I'd built with my own 2 hands, I finally knew that the best revenge wasn't anger. It was happiness.
The garden party was everything my mother excelled at creating. Perfectly manicured lawns, white linen tablecloths, and a 3-tier cake that probably cost more than our monthly grocery bill. This wasn't just a party for my nephew Oliver's 8th birthday. It was a statement. My mother, Patricia Montgomery, believed in statements. "Stay near the back," she instructed us when we arrived. My husband, Andrew, adjusted his tie and said nothing. He was good at saying nothing. Our 2 children, 7-year-old Sophie and 5-year-old Lucas, stood close together near the garden gate, watching the other children run across the lawn in their expensive party clothes. Sophie wore a dress from a department store. Lucas had on khakis and a polo shirt I'd found on sale. They looked fine, clean, pressed, appropriate. But next to my sister Diane's children in their designer outfits, they looked like they'd wandered in from a different economic bracket. Which I suppose was the point my mother wanted to make. "Sarah." Diane swept over in a flowing sundress that probably cost more than my car payment. "You made it. Mother wasn't sure you'd come." "It's Oliver's birthday," I said. "Of course we came. Well, the important guests are already here. The Hendersons, the Whitfields, Judge Morrison and his wife." She glanced at my children. "Your little ones can play in the side yard. The main activities are for the primary guests." Primary guest. At an 8-year-old's birthday party. Andrew's hand found mine. His grip was firm, steady. He'd been listening. My brother Thomas appeared with his wife, Jennifer, and their twin daughters, both 9. They were dressed in matching silk dresses with real pearl necklaces. My mother had bought them, I was certain. She'd never bought my children anything. "Sarah, Andrew," Thomas said with a nod. Good of you to come support the family. Support. As if we were distant relatives doing them a favor, not immediate family. The party began with games. Elaborate games with expensive prizes. Oliver and the other important children, as my mother had designated them, competed for gift cards, electronics, and designer accessories. My children watched from the side yard, sitting on a stone bench under a tree. I started toward them, but Andrew touched my elbow. Not yet, he said quietly. They're isolated. I know. His voice was calm, but something in his eyes made me pause. Not yet. Lunch was served on the main lawn. Long tables with place cards. Sophie and Lucas weren't assigned seats. Neither were we. The message was clear. We could eat, but only after the important guests were settled. My mother held court at the head table, surrounded by her social circle. She was in her element, hosting with practiced grace, her silver hair perfectly styled, her cream-colored suit impeccable. Such a lovely party, Mrs. Henderson gushed. You always know how to create magic, Patricia. One does what one can for the grandchildren who matter, my mother said, her voice carrying across the garden. Her eyes flickered toward my children still sitting alone. Some require more investment than others. Several people laughed, polite, knowing laughs. Sophie's hand found Lucas's. They sat very still. Andrew set down his untouched plate. He picked up his briefcase from where he'd left it by our feet. I'd wondered why he'd brought it to a child's birthday party. Now I was beginning to understand. Andrew. I whispered. Watch, he said. My mother stood to give a toast. Everyone quieted, champagne glasses raised. To my grandson Oliver, she began. A child who represents the very best of this family. Intelligence, breeding, promise. These are the qualities we celebrate today. She paused, her smile sharp. These are the qualities that determine a child's worth. That separate the important from the incidental. More laughter. Diane beamed. Thomas raised his glass higher. My mother continued, emboldened by her audience. I've always believed in investing in excellence. In children who will carry forward the family legacy with distinction. Which is why the family trust has been structured to reward achievement, breeding, and social standing. She looked directly at my children. Birthday parties, you see, are for important children only. The ones who count. The ones who will make something of themselves. Her smile was glacial. Yours, Sarah, simply don't qualify. The garden went silent except for the string quartet, still playing obliviously. Sophie's face crumpled. Lucas pressed closer to his sister. They held each other, two small figures under the tree, trying not to cry in front of 50 people who'd just been told they didn't matter. That's when Andrew stood up. He didn't rush. Didn't shout. He simply rose from his seat at the back table, briefcase in hand, and walked toward the main lawn. His footsteps were deliberate, measured. Every eye turned to watch him. Andrew, please, I started, but he was already moving. He stopped in the center of the lawn, directly in front of my mother's table. Then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed. Not a bitter laugh. Not sarcastic. A genuine, almost surprised laugh, as if he'd just heard the punchline to a joke he'd been waiting years to understand. The garden froze. My mother's smile faltered. Andrew opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick folder of documents and set them on the table in front of my mother. Then he pulled out another folder. And another. Legal documents, financial statements, official letterhead on every page. Patricia, he said conversationally, as if commenting on the weather. I think we need to talk about the trust. My mother's face went rigid. This is hardly the time. The Montgomery Family Trust, Andrew continued, his voice carrying easily across the now silent garden. Established by your father in 1987. Current value, approximately $47 million. Gasps rippled through the guests. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. Andrew, stop this immediately, my mother hissed. The trust that pays for this house. He gestured to the mansion behind us. The trust that covers your country club membership, your car, your lifestyle. The trust that paid for this very party. He opened the first folder and held up a document. The trust you've been telling everyone you control. He paused. You don't. The color drained from my mother's face. Andrew pulled out another document. Your father's will, revised in 2015, 3 years before his death. He made several changes, including appointing a new trustee. He looked at her. Me. The champagne glass in my mother's hand trembled. That's not possible, Diane said, standing up. Mother's been managing the trust for years. Your mother has been receiving distributions from the trust, Andrew corrected. Monthly allowances that I approve. She doesn't manage anything. She just spends what I authorize. He laid out more documents across the table. Bank statements, distribution records, legal authorizations, all bearing his signature. Your grandfather knew your mother's priorities, Andrew said, looking at Oliver and the other important grandchildren. He knew she'd play favorites, create hierarchies, use money as a weapon. He glanced back at Sophie and Lucas. So he changed the trust structure to protect all his grandchildren equally. Thomas had gone pale. Why didn't anyone tell us? Your mother was told. In 2015, when the will was read. She chose not to share that information with the family because it didn't serve her narrative. Andrew pulled out another document. She's been accepting monthly distributions of $40,000 for 8 years while claiming to control the family fortune. Judge Morrison leaned forward, squinting at the documents. These appear legitimate. Montgomery Trust letterhead, proper legal seals. They're completely legitimate, Andrew said. I've been trustee since your father's death, Patricia. Every dollar you've spent I approved. Every party, every vacation, every country club charge. He met her eyes. Including today's event. The caterers billed the trust account this morning. I authorized the payment. My mother's hands were shaking now. So when you say birthday parties are for important children only, Andrew continued, his voice still conversational but with steel underneath, you should understand that this birthday party exists because I decided your grandson was worth celebrating. Just as I decide every other expenditure you make. He pulled out one more document, a long spreadsheet. Here's an interesting summary. Over the past 8 years I've authorized $1.6 million in distributions to you, Patricia, your monthly allowance plus special requests, house maintenance, parties, gifts for the important grandchildren. He looked at Diane and Thomas. Meanwhile, Sarah has never requested a single distribution. Not once. Despite being entitled to exactly the same monthly allowance you receive, Mother. $20,000 per month according to the trust terms. I felt my jaw drop. What? You never asked, Andrew said simply. And I followed your lead. You wanted to be independent, build our own life. So we did. He turned back to my mother. But that changes today. The garden was silent except for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Effective immediately, I'm restructuring the trust distributions. Patricia, your monthly allowance is being reduced to match actual minimum living expenses. The difference will be redirected to Sarah's family and to equal education funds for all grandchildren. No more hierarchy. No more important and unimportant children. My mother finally found her voice. You can't do this. Andrew tapped the documents. I'm the trustee. Your father gave me complete discretion over distributions. I've been generous because Sarah asked me to be. She didn't want family drama. She wanted you to enjoy your retirement. He glanced at Sophie and Lucas still holding each other under the tree. But that generosity ends when you tell my children they don't count. Andrew, Judge Morrison spoke up. I should mention I reviewed your father-in-law's trust documents as a favor to him before he passed. This young man is correct. The trustee has absolute authority over distributions. My mother sank into her chair. Diane was staring at the documents. All these years, you've been pretending. I wasn't pretending anything, my mother said sharply. I simply allowed you to assume. You told us you controlled everything, Thomas interrupted. You made us compete for your approval. You treated Sarah like... He stopped looking at me. Like she was less than us. Andrew gathered his documents back into the briefcase. The trust attorney will contact everyone this week with the new distribution schedule. All grandchildren will receive equal education funds. All of your father's children will receive equal allowances. No exceptions. He turned to face the assembled guests. Many of them looked uncomfortable now, realizing they'd been complicit in humiliating children who, it turned out, came from the wealthiest branch of the family. This party cost approximately $15,000, Andrew said. The trust paid for it as always. But going forward, Patricia, your entertainment budget will be significantly reduced. You'll need to choose your celebrations more carefully, and perhaps more kindly. He closed the briefcase with a decisive click. Then he walked across the lawn to where Sophie and Lucas sat. He knelt down in front of them, eye level with our children. You count, he said firmly. You've always counted. And anyone who says otherwise doesn't understand what actually matters. Sophie wiped her eyes. Are we really rich, Daddy? We're comfortable, Andrew said. But more importantly, we're kind. That's worth more than any trust fund. He stood, taking each child's hand. Come on. Let's go get ice cream. Real ice cream, not whatever fancy thing they're serving here. As we walked toward the gate, my mother's voice called out. Sir, wait. Please. We need to discuss this. I turned back. She looked smaller somehow. Diminished. The queen of her carefully constructed kingdom, discovering she'd been ruling at someone else's pleasure all along. What you said about my children, I said quietly, that they don't count, that they're not important. I glanced at Andrew, standing strong and steady with our kids. My husband just showed you exactly how wrong you are. And he didn't even raise his voice. We walked out of the garden party, leaving behind the stunned silence, the expensive decorations, and the carefully constructed hierarchy that had just collapsed like the house of cards it always was. In the car, Lucas asked, Can we really get ice cream? Absolutely, Andrew said, starting the engine. Even though we're not important enough for birthday parties? Sophie asked, her voice still small. Andrew looked at her in the rearview mirror. Sophie, you're so important that your great-grandfather literally restructured his entire estate to protect you. He put me in charge specifically to make sure you and your brother would always be treated fairly. That's how important you are. Then why did Grandma say? Because sometimes people who feel powerless try to make others feel small to feel bigger themselves, I said gently. Your grandmother forgot she wasn't actually in control. Today your dad reminded her. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, Dad laughed at her. I did, Andrew admitted. Because it was absurd. She was bragging about money that isn't even hers at a party she didn't pay for, while insulting children who are protected by the very trust she thought she controlled. Sometimes the only response to absurdity is laughter. And documents, Lucas added seriously. Andrew smiled. Yes. And documents. We drove to the ice cream shop in town. The same place we always went. No pretense, no hierarchy. Just a family getting dessert on a Saturday afternoon. My phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from Diane Thomas, my mother. I turned it off. You okay? Andrew asked as we sat outside with our cones. I think so, I said. I never knew about the monthly allowance we could have been taking. You never wanted it, he said simply. You wanted to make our own way. I respected that. $20,000 a month for 8 years. That's almost $2 million. And we're fine without it. Good jobs, good lives, good kids. He watched Sophie and Lucas racing around, laughing now, the party already forgotten. But maybe it's time to accept what your father wanted you to have. I leaned against him. She really thought she controlled everything. She controlled the narrative. That's different from controlling the money. Andrew finished his cone. Your father was smart. He picked an outsider as trustee. Someone who couldn't be manipulated by family politics. Sophie ran up, chocolate smeared on her face. Dad, do we have to go to Grandma's parties anymore? Not unless you want to, Andrew said. Good, she said firmly. Ice cream is better. Lucas nodded in agreement, his vanilla cone dripping. We sat there as the afternoon faded, watching our children be children, free from hierarchies and judgments. Just two kids enjoying ice cream, unaware they'd been at the center of a power shift that would reshape their family for generations. Sometimes the most important children are the ones who don't need to be told they're important. They just need to be loved.
My name is Lakeisha Jablonski, and my brother once told his country club friends that I drove around all day while he actually contributed to society. This was 3 hours after I'd authorized a counterterrorism operation in Yemen that saved 200 lives. The thing about being a 2-star general in Joint Special Operations Command is that nobody knows what JSOC actually does, and I prefer it that way. When civilians hear military, They picture parades and salutes. They don't picture encrypted sat phones at 3 a.m. or authorization codes that can redirect entire carrier strike groups. My family certainly didn't. My brother, Trevor, worked in pharmaceutical sales. He made good money, the kind that bought a McMansion in the suburbs and a BMW with heated seats. To my parents, this was success incarnate, something visible, something they could brag about at their bridge club. I'd been in the Army for 22 years. Lakeisha does something with the government, my mother would say vaguely at family gatherings, her tone suggesting I processed paperwork at the DMV. Very stable. Good benefits. The benefits were excellent. The presidential helicopter was particularly nice. It started when I was 30, fresh off my promotion to major. I'd come home for Thanksgiving, still jet-lagged from Kosovo, and found myself seated next to Trevor's new girlfriend, Stephanie, who worked in marketing. "So what do you do?" Stephanie asked brightly, reaching for the cranberry sauce. "I'm in the Army." "Oh, like recruiting?" My cousin thought about joining once. "Something like that," I said. Trevor leaned over. "She's basically middle management, Steph. Government work. Can't really get fired, you know how it is." I'd spent that morning in a secure video conference with the Secretary of Defense, discussing the insertion timeline for a hostage rescue in the Caucasus. I'd had 3 cups of coffee and authorized the deployment of $60 million in assets. "Sure," I said. "Can't get fired." The pattern solidified over years. Every promotion took me deeper into the classified world, further from any conversation I could actually have with my family. When I made lieutenant colonel, my father asked if that meant I'd get one of those little offices with a window. When I pinned on my first star at 38, becoming one of the youngest brigadier generals in JSOC, my mother's main concern was whether the ceremony would conflict with Trevor's engagement party. It didn't. I flew in from Qatar, attended both, and flew back out. Nobody asked where I'd been. "Government travel," I'd said. "Training thing." My mother had patted my hand sympathetically. "Well, at least you get to see different places, dear, even if it's just military bases or whatever." I'd been in the Royal Palace in Riyadh the day before, briefing the Saudi defense minister on a joint operation. But sure, military bases or whatever. The mockery was never cruel, exactly. That was the insidious part. It was condescending in the way that only family can manage, a kind of pitying dismissal wrapped in concern. They weren't trying to hurt me. They genuinely believed I'd settled for less. At Trevor's wedding, his best man made a toast about everyone finding their path, glancing meaningfully at me. Some people climb mountains, some people guard them, right? Everyone chuckled. I smiled into my champagne. I'd literally climbed K2 during winter warfare training, but who was counting? When I made Major General at 41, the second star, the one that came with Joint Special Operations Command in my official title, I simply didn't tell them. What would I say? I couldn't explain what JSOC did. I couldn't mention the operations, the task forces, the direct action missions coordinated across 17 countries. I couldn't tell them about the Situation Room or the secure facility at Fort Bragg, or the fact that I reported directly to a 4-star who reported directly to the president. So I didn't. "Still doing the Army thing?" my father asked at Christmas. "Yep." "Good for you, honey. Stability is important." Stability? Right. Nothing more stable than planning special operations missions in active war zones. By 43, I'd accepted the absurdity of my double life. At work, I was General Jablonski, or ma'am. I had a security detail, a staff of 40, and authorization codes that could scramble rapid response teams anywhere on the planet. I'd briefed presidents, plural. I'd made decisions that altered the course of regional conflicts. At home, I was Lakeisha, who never quite lived up to her potential. The cognitive dissonance should have bothered me more. Instead, I found it darkly hilarious. My mother once tried to set me up with her dentist's divorced son because "You're not getting any younger, and he has a stable practice." I'd taken the call in my office at Fort Bragg, beneath a wall displaying the Joint Service Commendation Medal and 2 Defense Superior Service Medals. "Sure, Mom. I'd said. Give him my number. She never did. She later told me she'd decided against it, because you travel so much for work and he really needs someone settled. I'd been in Germany that week, coordinating with NATO commanders on a Baltic security initiative. The really spectacular part was how confident they were in their assessment of my life. Trevor, especially, had constructed an entire narrative about my career that bore no resemblance to reality but that he defended with absolute conviction. Lakeisha's fine with the simple life, he told his colleagues once, when I'd stopped by his office to meet him for lunch. Not everyone needs the stress of real responsibility, you know? I'd smiled blandly. Real responsibility. I'd authorized a drone strike that morning. The target had been neutralized with zero collateral damage. 17 analysts had spent the night confirming the intelligence. But, sure, no real responsibility. Must be nice, one of his colleagues said, having a job where you can just clock out. It has its moments, I agreed. I couldn't even be angry. The gulf between their assumptions and my reality was so vast it became abstract. They weren't mocking me. They were mocking a fictional character they'd invented, someone who barely resembled me at all. The fiction solidified into family mythology. I became poor Lakeisha in their narrative. The sister who'd never quite figured things out, who joined the military because she didn't know what else to do and just stayed, who probably pushed papers and attended the occasional meeting and called it a career. At my father's 70th birthday, Trevor's father-in-law, a retired insurance executive, cornered me by the dessert table. So, Lakeisha, Trevor tells me you're still in the service? I am. And you're what, some kind of administrator? Something like that. He nodded sagely. Lot of good people in those support roles. Important work, keeping the machine running. He patted my shoulder. Unsung heroes, really. I'd flown in from a NATO summit. The French defense minister had requested a private briefing. The German chancellor had asked me to dinner. But yes, support roles. Unsung heroes. Thanks, I said. I appreciate that. The irony sustained me. It became a kind of game. How much could I deflect? How vague could I be? How thoroughly could I hide in plain sight? My family's absolute certainty about my mediocrity became the perfect operational security. Nobody suspects the family disappointment of running covert operations. Then came the gala. Trevor had been promoted to regional vice president of sales for his pharmaceutical company, a genuinely impressive achievement that he'd spent 6 months telling everyone about. The company was throwing a celebration at the Meridian Hotel downtown. Black tie, open bar, 200 guests, a string quartet. My mother called 3 times to make sure I was coming. It's so important for Trevor, she said. All the executives will be there. You should try to make connections, Lakeisha. Network a little. You never know what opportunities might come up. I'll be there, Mom. And please wear something nice, not your uniform. I'd been planning to wear my dress blues, actually, the formal uniform with the medals and insignia that would have answered every question they'd never asked. But there was a certain poetry in maintaining the charade. I'll wear a dress, I said. Thank you, honey, and maybe try to seem successful? I know your job isn't glamorous, but you could at least pretend to be doing well. I'd been in the Oval Office that afternoon, briefing the president on a situation developing in the South China Sea, but sure, I'd try to seem successful. The night of the gala, I wore a simple black cocktail dress and minimal jewelry. I looked nice, professional but understated. Exactly what they expected from someone who did something with the government. The Meridian's ballroom glittered. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, waiters circulating with champagne and canapes. Trevor stood near the center in an expensive tuxedo, holding court with a group of executives. My parents flanked him like proud generals, which given my actual rank was another layer of irony. Lakeisha! My mother rushed over, kissing my cheek. You made it! And you look lovely. Doesn't she look lovely, Richard? My father nodded approvingly. Very nice, very professional. Come meet Trevor's CEO, my mother said, already pulling me toward the center of the room. James Patterson, wonderful man, brilliant businessman. Trevor saw us approaching and waved enthusiastically. "Keisha, you're here!" He'd called me Keisha since we were kids. At work, nobody called me anything but General or Ma'am. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. Trevor turned to the distinguished man beside him, 50s, silver hair, $1,000 suit. "James, I want you to meet my sister. This is Lakesha." James Patterson extended his hand with the practiced warmth of someone who'd spent decades in corporate leadership. "Trevor speaks very highly of you. Pleasure to meet you." "Likewise," I said. Trevor threw his arm around my shoulders, the big brother gesture he'd perfected in adolescence. "Keisha here is the humble one in the family. While I'm out here climbing the corporate ladder, she's keeping it real." Several executives had drifted closer, drinks in hand, curious about Trevor's family. "What field are you in, Lakeisha?" one of them asked. Before I could answer, Trevor jumped in. "She's in delivery services, actually." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the moment where I had to decide how much truth to reveal. Usually, I deflected. But something about Trevor's tone tonight, the slightly condescending chuckle in his voice, made me pause. "Delivery services," James Patterson repeated politely. "Yeah," Trevor said, warming to his subject. His voice carried across the circle of executives, drawing more attention. "My sister! Everyone! She delivers packages for a living. You know those Amazon vans you see everywhere?" The laughter started, not mean-spirited, but amused. The successful executives chuckling at the quaint simplicity of blue-collar work, at Trevor's charming self-deprecation about his family's varied achievements. "Trevor," my mother said weakly, but she was smiling too. No, it's great," Trevor continued. "Someone has to keep America's economy moving, right? While I'm pushing pills, Keisha's pushing parcels." He squeezed my shoulder. "Different kinds of important." More laughter. One executive, a woman in a red dress, raised her glass in mock salute. "To essential workers." James Patterson, to his credit, tried to be gracious. He patted my shoulder with the kind of forced warmth reserved for awkward social moments. "Honest work, I suppose," he said. "Nothing wrong with that. We all start somewhere." The condescension dripped like honey, the assumption that I'd started here and stayed, that this was my ceiling, my limit, my small life. I smiled. "Someone has to do it." "That's the spirit," Trevor said. "Keisha never complains, just shows up, does the job. I really admire that." He admired it. The decorated 2-star general was being admired for showing up to a job that didn't exist. The conversation moved on. Trevor launched into a story about his recent sales figures. The executives clustered closer, laughing at his jokes, asking about his strategies. I stood at the edge of the circle, holding my champagne, invisible again. Across the ballroom, I caught my mother's eye. She smiled at me. That same sympathetic smile she'd been giving me for years. Poor Lakeisha. At least she's here. At least she's trying. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out discreetly, angling it away from the crowd. The screen showed a single word in red text: priority. I stepped away from the circle, moving toward the ballroom's side corridor where the noise faded. I opened the encrypted message. "Thunderstorm active. POTUS authorization required. Timeline: 90 minutes. Your presence required immediately." My stomach dropped. Thunderstorm was the code name for a high-level crisis response protocol, the kind that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong somewhere in the world and immediate command decisions were needed. I had 90 minutes to get to Fort Bragg or the Pentagon, whichever was closer. Given current traffic, Fort Bragg was possible if I left now. I typed back, "Location, Meridian Hotel downtown. Extraction?" The response came in 15 seconds. "Sending detail. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. I had 12 minutes to gracefully extract myself from my brother's corporate gala before a military detail arrived to collect a 2-star general for a classified emergency. I walked back into the ballroom, scanning for my parents. My mother was talking animatedly with a group of Trevor's colleagues. Trevor himself was still holding court, now discussing his new boat. This was going to be interesting. I moved back toward the circle of executives, catching Trevor's attention. "Hey, I need to head out soon. Early morning tomorrow." Trevor frowned. "Already? Come on, stay for dinner at least. They're doing filet mignon. I wish I could. Work thing. On a Saturday night? He laughed. What, Amazon's doing Sunday deliveries now? More chuckles from the executives. The woman in the red dress looked at me with exaggerated sympathy. They work you too hard, honey. It's fine, I said. Really? Congratulations again, Trevor. You've earned this. I meant it. He'd worked hard for his promotion. None of this was his fault. Not really. He'd constructed his narrative about me based on the limited information I'd given him, and I'd never corrected it. That was about to change. I moved toward the ballroom doors, checking my watch. 8 minutes. My mother intercepted me near the coat check. Leaving so soon, sweetie? You just got here. Work emergency, Mom. I'm sorry. On a Saturday, Lakeisha, you need to set boundaries. They'll walk all over you if you let them. I know, Mom. She hugged me, and I caught the familiar scent of her perfume, the same one she'd worn my entire childhood. Drive safe, and maybe think about looking for something with better hours? Trevor's company is always hiring for administrative positions. I could ask him. I'm fine, Mom, really. 5 minutes. I collected my coat and stood in the lobby, watching the ballroom through the glass doors. The party continued without me. Trevor laughing, my parents beaming, the executives toasting to success and achievement, and all the visible markers of a life well lived. My phone buzzed. Detail arriving. Colonel Martinez, black Suburban. 2 minutes. Through the hotel's front windows, I saw the vehicle pull up, a black Suburban with government plates and diplomatic flags. The kind that screamed official business to anyone paying attention. A man in army dress uniform stepped out. Colonel Martinez, one of my senior staff officers. He'd been at Fort Bragg for the crisis briefing and had clearly been dispatched to collect me. This was it, the moment where my two lives collided in the most spectacularly public way possible. Martinez walked through the hotel's front doors and scanned the lobby. His eyes found me, and he straightened. I could have stopped him, could have walked out quickly, handled this discreetly. But something in me, some deep, tired part that had endured 22 years of condescension, made a different choice. I stayed where I was. Martinez approached and stopped 3 feet away. His posture was parade ground perfect, his expression all business. Then he did exactly what protocol demanded. He saluted. General Jablonski, he said, his voice carrying across the lobby. Code word Thunder confirmed. The situation has escalated. The vehicle is ready at the exit. We need to move immediately. The lobby wasn't empty. A dozen people stood frozen. Hotel staff, other guests, a few gala attendees who'd stepped out for air, all of them staring. I returned the salute crisply. Understood, Colonel. Status? JSOC Command is standing by for your authorization, ma'am. The SecDef is in transit. They need you in the air within 30 minutes. Copy that. I turned toward the ballroom doors. Through the glass, I could see my family. Still laughing, still celebrating, completely unaware that reality was about to crash through their carefully constructed narrative. I pushed open the doors. The noise of the party hit me like a wave. Conversation, laughter, clinking glasses. Colonel Martinez followed at my shoulder, his uniform drawing immediate attention. People turned, curious, confused. Trevor saw me first. His expression shifted from puzzlement to concern as he took in Martinez's uniform, the medals, the insignia marking him as a senior field officer. Kesha, what's going on? I walked through the crowd toward him. People stepped aside automatically, responding to something they couldn't quite name, the weight of authority, the precision of movement, the sudden gravity that had entered the room. The string quartet trailed off mid-phrase. I stopped in front of Trevor and his CEO, with my parents and the circle of executives watching in confused silence. Martinez stood at attention beside me. Trevor looked between us, his face pale. Lakeisha, what? Sorry to interrupt, I said calmly. I need to leave. Work emergency. James Patterson frowned at Martinez's uniform, clearly trying to reconcile the picture. Is everything all right? Can we help with something? Martinez remained silent, waiting for my cue. The whole ballroom had gone quiet now, 200 people watching our little tableau. Trevor's voice came out uncertain. The Amazon thing? They send military escorts now? I met his eyes. For 22 years I'd kept the secret. For 22 years I'd let them believe their fiction. But standing here, in this moment, with Martinez at my shoulder and a crisis waiting for my command, I was done. Not quite, I said. My mother stepped forward, her hostess instincts taking over despite her confusion. I'm sure whatever this is can wait until tomorrow. Lakeisha, tell them you're at a family event. Martinez's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression tightening. General, I'm sorry, but we're out of time. The situation in... He caught himself, glancing at the civilians. Ma'am, we need to move now. The word hung in the air like a dropped bomb. General. I watched my brother's face as the word registered, watched the confusion morph into disbelief, then into something approaching horror. General? Trevor repeated faintly. James Patterson's expression had shifted entirely. No more condescension, no more paternal warmth. He was looking at me the way people do when they suddenly realize they've catastrophically misread a situation. I scanned the room slowly, taking in all the faces. The executives who'd laughed at the Amazon joke, the colleagues who'd pitied my simple life. My parents frozen in place, their champagne glasses halfway to their lips. I looked at my brother. Well, I said, letting the slightest smile touch my lips, it seems my Amazon has arrived. The silence was absolute. Someone had turned off the music entirely. 200 people stood frozen, watching. Trevor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. James Patterson had gone completely white. The woman in the red dress looked like she might faint. I turned to Martinez. Let's go, Colonel. I want to be wheels up in 20 minutes. Yes, ma'am. I walked toward the exit, Martinez falling into step beside me. The crowd parted like water, people pressing back against the walls, their faces shocked, embarrassed, some dawning with horrified recognition. As I reached the doors, I heard my father's voice, barely a whisper, Jesus Christ. Then I was in the lobby, then outside, the cold night air sharp against my face. Martinez held open the Suburban's door. Tough crowd? He asked quietly. You have no idea, Colonel. I slid into the vehicle. Martinez closed the door and moved to the front passenger seat. The driver pulled away smoothly, the hotel's lights fading behind us. My phone lit up with the classified briefing materials. A rapidly developing situation in the Persian Gulf. Multiple assets in play. Presidential authorization pending my assessment and recommendation. I opened the file and began to read. Behind me, somewhere in that ballroom, my family was learning the truth, processing the reality, confronting the fact that for 22 years, they'd been mocking someone who held more real power in her encrypted phone than their entire company had in combined assets. I wondered if Trevor would call. I wondered if any of them would. But as the briefing documents filled my screen, satellite imagery, intelligence assessments, recommended courses of action, I found I didn't particularly care. I had work to do, real work, the kind that actually mattered.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment in the story has touched your heart, brought you some reflection, some emotion, and hope. Thank you for taking the time to experience it with us, and hope that each next story will always accompany you on your life journey.